Okay, so welcome everyone to this Litmaps webinar. I'm Marina, so I'm the Litmaps marketing manager, and today is just about giving you a quick demo and a quick understanding of the basic literature review process and how Litmaps fits into that, what the Litmaps tool is, and showing you the key ways to use it in your literature review process. And we also have plenty of time for questions and covering anything else that people are interested in today. So just a little bit of admin also. So try to stay muted for as much of the call as you can. And if you have a question, I'm going to try to stop in sections so that way you can ask your question at those times. And of course, at the end, there'll be lots of time for questions as well. It's also a bit of a tedium for me. The whole webinar, I'm always admitting people. So if you hear these little dinging noises, that's just people getting into the Google Meet, and I'm constantly needing to admit people. So it's a little distracting, but that's kind of the way it goes. So just a heads up, so you can hear the little blinging sound is already happening. So let me just pull up the small presentation I have before we jump into the demo. And yes, and as some people are already on the chat, they're introducing themselves. That's great. Definitely use the chat, and yeah, feel free to ask questions on there as well. Or again, at the end of every section, I'll kind of go through those questions or ask out loud for relevant questions on those topics. So yeah, welcome everyone. It's great to see how people are from all over the world. That's always really amazing to see in the webinar. So I'll just go ahead and admit some final people and pull up my presentation here. As I mentioned, we're going to go over the lit review process, going over two key workflows or concepts with Litmaps. So one is exploring a field, a brand new field. So say that's diving into a brand new literature review, and how do we use Litmaps for that? And the other key workflow and idea is just doing a really comprehensive search. So the literature review process is, of course, very big, but these are kind of the two key areas where Litmaps is very useful. So when diving into a totally new topic, and also once you have some understanding of a topic, how to make your research even more comprehensive to make sure you're not missing anything, to collect hundreds, maybe even thousands of papers. So both of these use cases, Litmaps is highly relevant. And at the end, I'll just go over a bit about Litmaps Pro because this is a freemium tool. That means we have a free and a paid version. So I can talk a little bit about what that means, and as well as a discount code if, for any interested signups for the premium. And then at the end, again, plenty of time for questions because yes, each of us here, we're going to be from many different backgrounds, and you might have unique questions for yourselves. So briefly going over the literature review process and where does Litmaps fit into that. So the literature review process, for those here that are perhaps undergraduate students or graduate students, those that are just starting out in research, it's always helpful to review what are the main steps in a literature review. So here we have the very first step is usually just to define your research question or topic. So what is it you're examining? What are you diving into? Getting that as clear and concise as possible is generally the very first step in this process, followed by looking for literature. So already at step 2, we're already in a place where we're probably going to be using the tools like Litmaps or Google Scholar, or all these other database search tools and so on to start finding papers on your topic. Next, and in tandem with these other steps, we're also always evaluating sources. So just because you're finding papers on your topic, that doesn't mean that you're going to be reading them and using them, right? So searching always comes with this, with the secondary clause of figuring out what's truly useful and relevant, and that's this evaluation step. You also have to end up reading and analyzing quite a few papers. So depending on your project, perhaps for an undergraduate student here, you might need just 10 or 20 papers. And of course, for more senior researchers, you might be reading hundreds or thousands of papers very briefly and trying to analyze them. And of course, there's many kinds of reviews. There's systematic reviews, umbrella reviews, such a huge spectrum here. But all of these are generally involving these steps thus far. And once we've read and analyzed, and throughout this whole process, we're also trying to stay organized, right? So if we have many papers, we're going to end up doing a write-up. We need to know what paper said what and at what point, and citing it and referencing it. So staying organized is very important. Writing is the key aspect of every lit review, right? What did we actually find out here? Summarizing that. And lastly, citing and referencing appropriately. So although these are all the steps in the process, that doesn't mean this is a linear thing. So this can all be connected in different ways. You're jumping between them. Perhaps you've written something and then you're trying to figure out which paper said that. So then you go back to the literature search, or perhaps you're organizing something and now you need to go and cite and reference something. So these are all going to be connected and entwined. Okay. And so because this is a chaotic process, the key lesson here is don't get lost. And that's hopefully one of the goals of the Litmaps tool and also this webinar in general, is just giving you some strategies and ideas of how to remain on track and productive and not getting lost in the chaos of the hundreds, thousands, millions of articles out there that the person often has to face when doing a new literature review. So here's the kind of parts of this process that we see Litmaps fitting into. So first and foremost, is the search for relevant literature. That's, again, finding papers. This is the key feature of Litmaps and what we're really aiming to be helpful with. But that's not all. We also want to help you evaluate those sources to understand, say, what journal they're from. Is this relevant for my topic? What's the paper about, even before I read it? We also want to help you stay organized. So this, we're going to see something called tags. So categorizing your papers in different groups, and then even being able to do some basic citation and referencing using Litmaps. So again, for this final step, you might be using a tool like a reference manager. So Zotero, Mendeley, EndNote, PaperPal. There's many different reference managers out there. So those are already having their own utility, and that's not something Litmaps tries to replace. But with basic citation work, that's something Litmaps can also do. So sometimes you don't need to go and use many different tools. Sometimes you can do quite a lot even within a single tool. And that's what we're also going to go over. And just taking one step back from the actual lit review and just looking at what is Litmaps. So I think if I take a look at the poll here, I can see what's our background. So some of us here have never used Litmaps, and quite a few of us have only used it a tiny bit. And we are, the majority here are academics and professors. So I'm going to go ahead and close these polls. But regardless of these backgrounds, you might not be super familiar with Litmaps. And for this reason, I just give you a top level idea of what this tool is. So we're really about literature search, saving and organizing literature using tags, different groups, and so on, some simple citation mechanisms, and really powerful visualizations. So the visualization is the core, another core feature of Litmaps that really sets it apart from perhaps other tools you're using. Not just searching, but searching using visualization to make it more efficient and more productive. And finally, even sharing your work. So you can share Litmaps, you can share papers. All of this is designed to be super easy and integrated. And of course, for many research projects, you're very collaborative, so sharing is really important. Okay, so the next part here is just diving into the actual Litmaps search. So I have just a few slides, and then I'm going to open up the app and give you the demo for these basic searches and advanced searches using Litmaps. And after each of these key workflows, I'm going to stop for any questions people might have on that particular workflow. I'm going backwards. Okay, so when starting a literature review, we have some key challenges. So although many of us here, I think, are more senior researchers based on the poll, this doesn't mean we aren't immune to all of this, especially if you're diving into a completely new field or you're doing an interdisciplinary project. And for the undergraduate and graduate students, this is often a key challenge, is trying to face this huge mountain of literature and not getting overwhelmed. And once you do start diving into papers, it's pretty quick to see that there's just tons and tons of information. So sifting through what's really important and what's optional for me to read, this is a really key idea. And this is one of the key challenges that Litmaps also tries to fix. And finally, even if we are doing really well reading papers and understanding our topic, it can be really hard to see how different articles connect. How does the research connect? What does it all mean all together? And so this, again, is where Litmaps comes in. So to face this overwhelmed issue, in this workflow and Litmaps in general tries to encourage a really simple search strategy. So searching isn't just a haphazard process, right? It can be something done with some kind of strategy, with some procedure that I'm thinking about thoughtfully and repeating over and over. Being overloaded by the number of articles, the way we try to fix this is by really separating and prioritizing. So maybe there is 500 papers on my topic, but maybe only 10 of them are really the ones I need to be reading. And so spotting these important papers is another core use case of Litmaps. Finally, how it all connects. This is the visualization aspect, which we will show with the actual Litmap. So Litmap itself, that word, is a conjunction between literature and map, right? So we're creating a map or a visualization of the literature in order to really quickly see what's connected, how does it work, and to prioritize papers. So the simple search strategy is just going to be about going into the app, clicking on a button, typing in some keywords, and immediately trying to find the top most important paper. And from here, getting the top most important recommendations. In a nutshell, this is our core simple strategy, and that's what we're going to show right now in the demo. So I go ahead and switch into the app. So you can go to app.litmaps.com, and you'll end up on a page that looks like this once you've set up a free. So the free account gives you much more access. It's free. So that would be the very first step, is just to go on, set up a free account, and then you'll be landed on a page like this. My page just has more going on because I've already kind of started creating some tags and some maps. But I'll give you an idea of what it looks like from scratch. So here's my brand new workspace. We just consider this a workspace. They're separated based on projects. So if you are doing, say, literature reviews on very different projects, like maybe one is on birds and one is on dolphins, or something very different that in your mind they are not going to be connected, and you don't want the literature to be messy between them, then set up a whole new workspace for this project. And everything here is going to be saved within this workspace. Next step is just to go into the quick search dialog at the top left. And we're just going to start by searching for a starting paper. And in a few steps, you'll see exactly what that means. But we can either search here by my generic topic or searching for a paper you might already know. So in this case, I picked this example topic of forest carbon sequestration and biodiversity. This is an interesting topic. So I'm not an ecologist by background or have anything to do with it, but I find this pretty interesting. And so it's a fun example to use. It's just the impacts or how biodiversity interacts with when people plant forests for carbon sequestration. And so here I can browse through these recommended papers that are showing up based on this keyword search. And the first thing to note is with every paper recommendation here, I can see its title, I can see author and year, journal. But the thing I look for most immediately at this step is I'm just trying to find a really good starting paper. So what this means is, what's the very first paper I should dive into, and the first paper from which I want to see recommendations in other relevant literature. So oftentimes when I'm just starting a review, what's really useful is to actually find another review paper or a very top level paper, not something super specialized, but something that's a little more of an overview. So already, if I look through these, I see the second one here is the 10 golden rules for reforestation, et cetera, et cetera. And the really cool thing is here it has 161 references and 330 citations. So it's like a pretty well-connected paper to the literature, and it's relevant to my topic. So my goal here is just to find a paper along these lines with a good amount of citations and references. Click on it. And here, if I read the abstract in more detail, I might find, oh, hey, it's actually definitely relevant to my research and it's relevant to the topic I want to study. Then all I need to do is click Explore Related Articles. As a side note here, you can also select more than one paper. We'll see later in the webinar, you can have as many papers as you like to generate recommendations from. But for this simple strategy, we're just trying to keep it as lightweight as possible because we're brand new to the field. So in this case, I just select one paper. I click Explore Related Articles. And now we get what is the core value of Litmaps. So Litmaps works by taking any amount of input articles, in this case, just one, and finding the top most interconnected papers. So this visualization here, it's not just showing me this paper and its citations and references, it's showing me this paper and what are the most interconnected articles to it based on my paper's citations and references. So for example, I can see this paper here. It's not directly connected to my input article. However, it's highly interrelated because as you can see, it's these light blue lines that light up that's showing the connections to other papers. And each of these papers actually connect to each other. So it's this interconnectedness which makes these recommendations really valuable. It's not just saying your paper cites this paper, it's saying these are all talking about one another, and for this reason, they might be really relevant to your topic. So that's kind of the core algorithm of Litmaps, and we call it the top shared citations and references. And so all the recommendations that come from this are these hollow circles on the map, or they're in this sidebar here. So if we're scrolling through and you select one, you're going to see it light up on the map, and it's the exact same paper. So that's kind of the very first step. It's saying I had my topic, I found some starting paper on it that I thought was relevant. So that's this 10 golden rules paper. And then now I'm going through and finding other recommendations based on how interconnected they are to my starting paper. And that's basically the simple workflow to immediately get started on a brand new topic for literature review. What I'll go over from here on out is more about the details. So it's more about, now I'm starting to look for papers. We want to still stay organized. We want to keep track of what we're finding. We want to consider the literature review process holistically, right? We don't just need to find a bunch of papers. We need to do it really thoughtfully. Otherwise, again, we might get overwhelmed and overloaded. Those key challenges that we pretty much want to avoid, and that's the core use of Litmaps. So here, as I'm searching for articles, or as I'm reviewing these recommendations, if I find one that I think is useful, so for example, this one, it doesn't seem to be on biodiversity, but just as an example here, it's still on, it is a bit about biodiversity or carbon. So that's actually exactly on point. So what I might do is here, read the abstract, understand roughly what is this paper about, and go ahead and give it a tag. So tags are one of the key ways to stay organized in Litmaps, and they're very much like all the other ways you probably already stay organized. So it's just about when you're looking for papers that you're saving them to some kind of categories. Otherwise, you're going to end up perhaps with dozens of papers all over the place. It's much better to quickly identify what kind of category does this fit into and to save it as this subtopic. So here, this is just an example for the webinar. I just save it as this tag. So I'll just call this tree planting for now. I mean, this is, in the big picture, this is not an ideal kind of tag, but just to make things quick for us now, I give it some kind of name. And I'm going to go ahead and tag whatever other articles I think are relevant to my topic as I go through these recommendations. So again, you can go through recommendations on the map or through this list here on the left. And here again, there's something about another topic here. So maybe I would give this another tag. And so the idea here is as I'm going through, I can keep track of articles based on this general subtopic that is connected to my bigger topic, but also has some niche or aspect to it. Eventually, what I come out with is what I wanted to show you on my more polished or finished maps here. Sorry, I'll just show you what I mean. So here, for example, on this other workspace, I have already gone ahead and collected a few papers on my topic of biodiversity and carbon sequestration. And they're marked here in orange as this orange tag. And this is basically the goal, that as I'm going through and labeling and tagging papers, I can start to not only curate my set of articles that I'm interested in, but start to actually explore on these papers. And that's kind of the secondary goal of Litmaps, is a more comprehensive searching. And that's what I'll do in much more detail in the next section, which is about comprehensive searching. But for now, you can just keep in mind that this is really why staying organized is useful for many reasons. It's useful for yourself, so that way you can maintain lists of papers like this and see where they are. But it's also useful when it comes to exploring deeper and continuing to develop a really well-curated list of papers and a comprehensive lit review. I also wanted to briefly touch on the map itself. So perhaps I rushed through that a bit earlier. So I'm just going to admit a few more people. So here on the right-hand side, I had kind of been mentioning this is my map, but what is my map really? And are these papers just randomly organized here, or is there some kind of thoughtful visualization going on? Well, thankfully, the answer is that it is very thoughtful, and the top here is what makes it extra useful. And that's kind of the point I was alluding to earlier, that when we are having, say, thousands of recommendations, or even in this case, there's about 10 recommended papers here, but that can already start to be a lot. If you're looking at recommendation after recommendation, you're going to perhaps quickly get drained by the amount of papers there. So we can use this visualization to quickly identify what is most relevant to ourselves. And that's based on several aspects. So one is based on connection. If I look at any paper here, I can see how many lines are coming out of it and are connected to other papers on the map. So for example, if I select this paper, it has just 2 connections to my source papers. If I select this paper, it has only 1 connection. So the very first thing I can do is I could start prioritizing papers that have many connections. So these all have 2 connections and some have 1. So if I start reviewing only the ones with 2 connections, that's already telling me they're going to maybe be more relevant to my topic because they're connected to 2 of my other articles. Beyond connections, we can also use the visualization as a whole. So if you look at the bottom left corner of this map, you see the legend, which is showing us what the axes represent and what the nodes represent. So the x-axis by default in Litmaps is date. That's the date of publication. You can even see this visually here on the far left, so 2002 paper, on the far right, 2022, and they're just linearly, or not linearly, but they're increasing left to right. And then from bottom to top, the y-axis is the citation count. So if I select the paper at the far bottom here, we can see it has actually 0 citations. So this might be a bit, yeah, this is quite low. This is 0. Usually we expect even something like a small number. So here, for example, it's 5 citations. And if I select a paper towards the top of the map, then I'm going to see the most cited. So that's 773 citations for this paper that's located here at the top. Now, these axes make it really easy to quickly draw my eyes to one part of the map or the other based on what's more important. So going back to this literature review process, say I'm exploring a brand new field. I'm completely new to this topic of carbon sequestration and biodiversity. So now my question is, I just want to understand this topic from the top level really well. So what I actually want to do is look at the top left of my map, because these are going to be the most highly cited and historic papers. So here, again, this Ricketts 2004, the economic value of tropical forest coffee production. So can read through this abstract. Perhaps it's relevant, perhaps it's not. But the top left nature of it indicates that it's going to be a really well cited and perhaps very impactful paper on my topic. Conversely, which we might return to in the more comprehensive search strategy, if I look to the bottom right of my map, then I'm going to find the most newest papers, or just simply the farthest right paper. This is the newest work. And so perhaps in my literature review, I'm actually focused on what are the most recent advances in this topic. Maybe I already have some familiarity. In this case, we're going to look to the far right, and that way I can just find what's the newest research that is also super connected to the articles I already know. Okay, so this is just to get started. This is not necessarily everything we can do with Litmaps, but I just wanted to give you an idea of the key workflow here, which is simply, again, clicking on quick search, looking for some keywords, selecting one starting paper, and then generating an initial starting map for that article. I'm just going to check the chat for any initial questions we have on this. Someone lost the sound. Hopefully that was just this one person and not a universal issue. If many people are losing sound, let me know. How can someone add a paper as a file? This is a question I'm getting from Yasaman. I think you can add a paper as a file. We can do a quick test, but essentially if you go to quick search and you click import, here you can drag and drop BibTeX, which we're going to go over later, how to import entire files of papers. So say using and you have hundreds of papers, this is the easiest way to upload them. Or you can always start using papers. Once you're in the Litmaps ecosystem, you can always use papers you've already saved in Litmaps. You can search for them and so on. So hopefully this answers the question of how do I upload a file into Litmaps. How the degree of paper's interconnection is calculated, and how is it locally normalized? This is another question we have. So here, I think it is best to show you my algorithms guide, and I have a video describing the algorithms in great detail. So for the top shared citations and references, we're using the most interconnected articles. So when it comes to degrees, we actually had an algorithm update. So this might be better to hold off and send out later to make sure I'm not misquoting anything here. But I think it's essentially more like a 1-degree search than a 2-degree search. So when it comes to a single input article, I'll go back to that example to not confuse anyone. This example is a single input article. So for a single input article, we generate recommendations based off of its citations, references, and co-citations. And co-citations are the citations of this article's references. It can be a little bit confusing, but that means the number of papers we're using to find recommendations is 330 plus 161 plus all the other papers that are citing these references. So when you have a single input paper, we're actually looking at a very big network of interconnected literature. And this is why the recommendations can be really excellent and much better than just citations and references. In this respect, I guess you could say it's kind of like second degree, but not quite. Now, if I have more than one input paper, so here you can see I have 4 input papers. In this case, we actually only use citations and references. So we're using this, again, 161, 330, plus this 51 plus 174, and so on. So for every one of these papers, I'm looking at all of those references and citations. I'm making a network of hundreds of papers. It can be thousands or tens of thousands, depending on how many input papers you have. And from among all of these papers, we're looking at how they interconnect. So again, you would probably label this as a first-degree search. And by local normalization, I think, as far as I understand this question, there just is none, because it's just the top-ranked interconnectedness, right? So for example, this paper you can see, and in this map in particular, you see a lot of things have 2 connections, and some have even just 1. So the 2 connections is what we're seeing as the most interconnected. So sometimes you might make a map and you'll have a paper that has 20 interconnections. Great. But otherwise, you know, this is just as good as it gets given my set of input papers. Okay, someone also asks, what are the sources of publications that can be managed via Litmaps? So you can clarify this question if I answer it incorrectly here, but the sources of publications, I'm going to take this to mean more of like a data question of like, where does our data come from and what papers we have access to and that kind of thing, which I will go into more detail towards the end. I think I'll save a bit of data discussion for the end to give you an idea of the database, how it's managed, and also like if you can add custom information. Let's do that at the end because it's a bit of a big topic. But it suffices to say the Litmaps database is a very large corpus of data, of open access metadata papers. And yeah, we'll dive into that towards the end. Someone's asking if I will share the demo after the webinar. Yes, we will send out recording and everything afterwards. And I'll discuss pro versus free at the end of the webinar.
Marina, may I clarify my question? Thank you so much for your answer.
Yeah.
My name is Marco.
Yeah.
And I would like to know whether we can manage somehow a PubMed or archive or Elsevier portals for publications. This was my question.
Okay, so about the source databases, yeah?
Yes, so
about source databases. Okay,
where are
great.
they taken from, those papers that you are mentioning? I didn't get it completely. Sorry for that.
Totally. No worries. Yeah, I can go over this in more detail at the end, but yeah, just in quick summary, it's simply using Semantic Scholar, OpenAlex, and Crossref. So these are 3 huge data providers. And I also have, at the end of this webinar in the post email, I will send the very detailed video of how the database is compiled, because it sometimes can be, depending on the researcher's background, it can be a bit unintuitive, because in a sense, most tools like Litmaps, they don't pull from all the specific journals or places like PubMed. Instead, we use these huge data providers. And so many other tools you're going to find are also using Semantic Scholar. That's a very common thing. And that itself is using a lot of open access metadata. So it's a rather complex pipeline, but what it means at the end is we have about 270 million plus papers. It's one of the largest corpuses of comparative AI tools. But yeah, it's why sometimes the question of like, does it use PubMed? Does it use Journal of Ecology? These is like a different way to view it. So for example, you'll find lots of PubMed papers, but that doesn't mean we're sourcing directly from PubMed. We're sourcing actually from these big, huge meta providers. But I'll go over that in detail at the end. I have some plots of the data, and I'll definitely send in an email, like the detailed video that is explaining exactly how we compile data, which can be more helpful because it can be quite a complex process. But yeah, I definitely share this in more detail. And here I have a question from you as well. So thank you for all these great questions. Can we export metadata about the papers? So I'll quickly show you the key export features from Litmaps. So the main one is exporting. Well, first of all, before we even get to export, if I click on a paper title, I go to that paper's source page and you can read it or access just whatever the source is. Secondly, if I want to export this citation, I just click on the settings of this paper and I click export. So here I can do different formats and export that paper. Additionally, if I have a set of articles anywhere, so this is my articles on the map, this is my article saved to this tag, in any of these places, I can also select them and click export them. So this is the main ways to export papers, and as in their references. So in a sense, yes, it's their metadata. And yeah, that's the key ways that we do this with Litmaps. Someone else asks, is Litmaps just exploring journal articles or books? So yeah, again, I'll talk about data at the end, but in a nutshell, you're actually going to find it's predominantly articles. So there are things like book chapters and so on, but yes, we would say that we are very article heavy for sure. And for example, we also have things like maybe some patents and things like that, but really the scientific peer-reviewed articles, this is the core thing that you're going to be finding and searching in Litmaps. Another really good question by Mary, thank you. What does the size of the circle indicate in the graph? So this can be answered again by this legend at the bottom left. So here I have citation count and date as my axes. And this node with the arrow in the middle, that's representing what does the circle size mean. So in this case, by default, it's the reference count. And again, if I click on the legend, you can change any of these values. So for example, I can make it a fixed size. It will not change. I can leave it as the reference count. I could change it to citation count. So this is adaptable. Okay, so we have discussed a bit of this initial literature review search. So the second big topic I'd love to cover with you is a comprehensive search. So we're kind of splitting literature review into two big topics here. One is saying we're diving in, we're completely new, we're just trying to find these initial few papers, just trying to understand my topic from the very beginning. The second part is saying some time has elapsed here, whether it's been a week or 10 years, and now you have a little bit more understanding of this field. You're coming in with perhaps already 5, 10 papers, maybe even hundreds. And now what your question is actually, am I done with this literature review? Do I have everything I need? Am I missing anything? And how do I continue to stay up to date? So this was a great question in the chat. How will Litmaps help me in my future research? So we can't anticipate the future. Papers are always coming out. How do I know what they are? These are the common challenges, and that's where Litmaps is also trying to come and fix this problem. So to fix this, we're searching on entire libraries now. We're not just looking for some keywords in an initial paper. We're actually putting in as many papers as we want to search on these papers to find more. We're making customizable searches, so there's not just a default recommendation anymore. Now we are actually using our own knowledge of the topic to get more specific. So here I have this key challenges that happen when we're trying to do a really comprehensive lit review and how Litmaps is trying to fix that. So library searching, customizing, and the really cool thing that's very Litmap specific is automatic alerts. So these are the 3 ways that we're going to try to fix these problems and do a really great comprehensive search. So when it comes to searching on a library, you can do this within the Litmaps tool using all the Litmaps papers you find. But a lot of you here, especially as many of you are professors or more senior researchers that perhaps haven't used Litmaps yet, you might already have plenty of papers, whether they're all stored as PDFs in your file explorer, whether they're stored in a different reference manager, whether they're perhaps stored in many different places. You probably have a very big, well-curated list. And so that's where this upload comes in handy. So you can just click quick search, upload file, and here you can drop in a BibTeX or RIS or do manual uploads. using key information to import all the relevant papers on your topic. From here, we do the same button, explore related articles, and now we're just seeing these recommendations for all these input articles here. So this is the key way to start a search on a library. And we're going to take it one step further by not just seeing all these hundreds of results from my search, but also by filtering. So filtering is the fastest way to try and search and get the most relevant results. So once you're doing a comprehensive search, you're probably looking for something more specific. You maybe have curated research on this topic over the last 15 years, and now you want to know, well, what have I missed? What's happened in the last 3 years? And for this reason, we have a date filter. You can look just at specific date ranges, and we have a keyword filter. And these two filters, they're based on the recommendations. So we use all of your input papers, but the things we recommend, we limit them based on if they fulfill these characteristics. This is how we're dialing in, getting more targeted. Lastly, with comprehensive searching and future thinking idea here, this automatic alert system. So here we have a simple feature called monitor. It's very simple. It's just like one button, but it's really powerful in that now, say you have given Litmaps the 400 papers you know about, and you're just asking every week, if a new paper comes out on my topic that's connected, just let me know. And that's all this does, is it will just automatically be running your search every single week. The Litmaps database is updated every week with hundreds of thousands of new papers. And so if anything comes out, you will just automatically know about it. So here, the first step was the comprehensive searching on a file. So the way I can show you this is firstly by just searching on Litmaps papers. So if you've been using the app and you have already saved papers to the app, you can always click on, so again, I started at quick search at the top left. I click my library. And from here, I can select any papers I have saved to tags. So whether that's selecting all the papers I have saved to a tag or just a couple, we can do all of this from the app itself. If you have papers stored offline, so in a reference manager or somewhere else, here's where you can drop that in. So for example, I will quickly export a set of items from Zotero and pull them into here. And here I'm just selecting, this is another collection I've curated. It's actually a tidy collection because in this case, we are imagining I've already done quite a bit of research on this particular topic, which for me was on how dolphins communicate, so with each other using whistles. It's a pretty cool topic. And so I click import, I imported all these files. And here at this top bars, you can also see how your importation process went. So we got some questions about the Litmaps database, and we have a lot of details on that. But the short way to know what papers do we have and which papers you have and where does that overlap is just to look at this information. So I can see this found 64 of my articles, and it actually has even one duplicate. So in Zotero, for example, perhaps I had this duplicated in my Zotero collection, and here it just cleaned it up for me and said, here's your 64 papers, because Litmaps is only going to generate maps with unique records when it comes to this process. So here I have imported these articles, and then I simply click explore related articles. So Litmaps will now, just like before, make the recommendations, but using all of these articles as an input. And as I briefly touched on, the way it's doing that is using just these articles, citations, and references. Now, the resulting map looks pretty intense. You can see every recommendation has many, 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 many lines. And that's because the articles in the middle, there's so many of them that they're sharing many different connections. And so the recommendations themselves are highly interconnected to those papers. So this is clearly saying, oh, there's a lot of information here that actually was missing that's highly relevant. But when it comes to comprehensive searching, we still don't want to get overwhelmed, right? There's tons of information to go through, and that's why I'm going to show how to use these filters. So the first one is the date filter. Right now it's set to all time, so recommendations are all time. I can quickly drill down and say, I'm only interested in the most recent literature, so 2022 and later. I just type 2022, click update results, and this is just the fastest way to drill down on a more specific set of papers if I'm interested in the most recent research. Conversely, you might be interested in more historical research. You might be doing historical analysis. In that case, you can even look for earlier years. And here now my recommendations, you can see they're all limited mostly to 2023, some in 2022. And I can go through these in the sidebar or on the map. The secondary filter here is keywords. So I will remove the date one for now to keep it simple. But the keyword filter is showing me, what are the most common terms it's seeing among all of my papers that I inputted. So this topic that I chose here is actually very generic. I didn't have a specific thing in mind. I was just collecting things on dolphin communications. But there is some specific things within this that we can study. Like we can say non-signature whistles, or perhaps we can look at how the vocal production learning. So like the idea that they're learning by producing vocals. So if I click on this, I'm now going to search for papers, so only get recommendations that mention this keyword in the title or abstract. So let's see how these results are. I click update results, looking just for this keyword. And here, wow, we can see, whereas before I was getting many, many recommendations, now I just have 5. So that's very limiting on the one hand, but on the other, it's really specific, right? So if I was really just interested in this sub niche, I've already found the most relevant papers super fast. That's very rewarding, and that really reduces my amount of time needing to look through all those hundreds of original recommendations. So for each of these, if you look at this title, if you don't see those keywords in the title, then they're probably going to be somewhere here in the abstract. If I just do a vocal search, here we go, in this abstract, vocal production learning. Easy. So these are the 2 excellent filters to use to be maintaining the most targeted search possible. Now, the third aspect we mentioned in the brief earlier demo is doing monitor. So if I click home here, that's just the home button. This is my saved map. And here we see 3 key options. So we've always, for the entirety of this webinar, we've been in this world, searching for articles, exploring related articles. But there's 2 other key features of Litmaps. So one is visualization and design. We're not going to go over this in so much detail in the webinar, but if there's any questions on it, let me know. But this is just about designing your map. So labeling different things, making it really beautiful for when you want to incorporate that into your research paper. You can do all of this in design mode. And finally, monitor. So monitor mode is dealing with this very simple aspect of having Litmaps automatically check for any updates, any new papers on the topic. So all I do is click open monitor, enable monitor, and that's it. Super easy. You can change this to weekly or monthly, and you can always disable it at the top right by clicking that enable button. Now monitor is off. And the one final aspect for focus searching that I wanted to also touch on is, I'm just going to remove this filter, is that Litmaps, again, another useful and rather unique feature is that we also have different algorithms. So I just briefly mentioned these. So at the top of this map and the top of your search area, you have all these options, right? So we did these 2 filters, but on the left here, this top shared citations and references, this is the algorithm we're using, but we can also change it. And this is another aspect of comprehensive searching. So the key takeaway here, the key differences is that looking at top connections is really useful to find relevant literature, but there's many cases where you might want to go beyond this. So the most obvious example is perhaps you are dealing with a very new paper that has very few citations. In this case, you might find that connections are not going to be so useful. Or in general, perhaps you have a paper that's just not so well connected, but you want to find what's really relevant to it. What we can do is use a different algorithm. So for example, this is a similar abstract entitled content. And this might be what you're seeing in other literature suggestion tools, but this is also one option in Litmaps. So this is just using how similar are all the other papers based on their abstract and title using the AI semantic similarity search. And this is often an area of nuance and many questions we get, right? Because Litmaps is often categorized into the AI tools, but it's a simple distinction to make that this algorithm is actually the only part of our app that is actually using AI, right? Because this shared citations and references, as I discussed, you know exactly how it's calculated. You could do it manually if you had the time, but it's an automated known system, whereas this is actually using AI semantic similarity. It's a minor distinction there to know what is AI and what is not. So again, I can run this on the similar abstract entitled content. This is a very big collection, and this is a more computationally intensive task So it will naturally take a bit longer to generate these suggestions than with connections. So just a note, we might be waiting here a few seconds. Yeah, this one's going to be a bit slow. And as a note here, you can also see this nice dialogue. This is a new feature we just came out with called the priority queue. So with certain searches, if you're searching on hundreds of papers, that's just incredibly computationally intense. They're going to take more time. And so if you are, if you're intending on doing lots of comprehensive searches, lots of big jobs, you can just keep in mind that a premium account is going to mean that you're in the priority queue. So your jobs will always complete before free users, for example. We have a system of prioritizing certain jobs over others based on premium versus free. So free jobs still will get done. We really value free users, but that's just one of the features of the premium plan. So this was finished perhaps faster than if I was on the free plan. So here I can see my recommendations. These are based on similar abstract and title content. And that's why we can even see a few here at the bottom that are completely unconnected to my papers. So this is just an interesting note that this one, for example, has no references that we have had cataloged and very few citations. Now, of course, that paper might have more references in reality, and I have more information as to why reference and citation counts vary. They vary across many different tools and many different search engines. It's part of a much more complex issue. But in this case, I can actually discover these things, that even though these references are not cataloged, I can still find it because of the abstract similarity. So that's a key way to maximize your comprehensive searching. So to take a step back and review this whole process one more time, we did a quick search, we imported a file. Here you can import many different ways. We did an explore related articles. And then from here, we drilled down by either using the date filter, the keyword filter, and even a different algorithm. Okay, now I'm going to go through these questions that came up while I was doing this section to see if there's anything we want to go over right now. And so there's a question about the features of Mendeley or reference managers, as in, presumably Shashi is asking, can you use Litmaps like a reference manager? And so besides the things I discussed earlier, like this core citation mechanisms, like, I can click on any paper and I can cite it, I can export it. Same with a whole group of papers, I can export all of these as a BibTeX and so on. That's the core citation functionality of Litmaps. If you're wanting to do anything more like delicate or more specific, you want to make an APA bibliography or MLA or anything specific, your best bet is just going to be to use a reference manager, because they're best equipped to create all the different kinds of citations that sometimes researchers need. That's just a small note. But again, it's really easy to import and export between these platforms. We discussed AI. There's an AI question. And this question, Arnaud also asked, can it be used to design a systematic review easily? So that's also a really good question. I had a guide for some time on systematic reviews with Litmaps. Let me just check if it's still live. Yeah, we had a brief article about that in the past, which I can include in our email follow-up. But in short, systematic reviews they're a much more specific kind of literature review. And for this reason, it really depends. It's more going to come down to you reviewing what are the requirements of my review, like how, for example, with systematic reviews, you often have to say what date you collected that data, what information you use, what database, and so on. So as long as you are able to follow those rules and best practices, from our perspective, there's no reason you can't use Litmaps. It's just more about knowing what those guidelines are and following them, no matter what tools you're using. And from our perspective, Litmaps is still a really useful part to at least add on top of any review, at least in this case where I'm showing you right now, this kind of papers aspect, because when we're searching just on keywords, intuitively speaking, this is where it's easiest to lose things, right? And that's one of the most challenging things, is that you're often doing this keyword and this keyword and this keyword, and it's really complicated. And so once you've curated hundreds of papers, simply doing this kind of connection search can be a really easy way to just double check, hey, is there anything interconnected here that I missed? So in this respect, I think it can be really useful. But again, making sure you follow those guidelines and understanding like what are the real requirements of whatever review this is, because they can be very specific and have lots of best practices. I'll make a note, though, to include this kind of information in the follow-up email, because this is a more technical thing, systematic reviews. I see there's a question by Jar. He's asking, or they're asking, if there's a new article that could impact my research, do I have a notification? Perfect. That's the monitor feature we just covered. So doing enable monitor will fix that. And is search limited to English articles? I can go over that more in the data section, but suffice to say, we definitely have articles that are not in English. The key thing to note with languages in Litmaps, that if you are interested in not limiting articles based on language, then the default algorithm will take care of this, and to some degree, because it's based on connection, right? So if a researcher writing in one language is citing another article, it can easily be in another language. This is not a limitation usually. However, by similar abstract and title content, it is a limitation because we are not doing auto-translate. So this is going to be based on the real content similarity, which means if these articles are all in English, their abstracts are all in English, then your recommendations are very, very, very likely going to all be in English because it's based on that actual content similarity, which is of course language dependent here. So that's just a small note. The default algorithm takes care of it, but don't use this if you want to see the diversity of languages in your results. So we discussed custom filters. And someone is asking about the comprehensive search is possible only on the Pro version. That's a great question. So while we're here, I'm just going to quickly review what is Pro versus what is free. So searching for articles, doing this quick search, this kind of the generic workflow is all possible on the free version. What's not possible is indeed these filters. This is Pro, this is Pro. Actually, sorry, I might be misspeaking because we recently changed our limitations. So let me actually check our pricing page here on our website. This is the best place to check. I'm just going to quick look. So actually on Pro, we are now allowing basic and advanced inputs, basic and advanced searching, and basic search. Okay, yes. So I think for now we say yes, indeed, this should only be available on Pro, and same with this. But these are things we are often examining in order to evaluate our user experience. So feel free to test that out. But by default, this is available on the Pro version only. However, changing your algorithm is something that all users can do. So whether you're Pro or free, you can change the algorithm to these different measures. You can also tag. You can use the more like this button, which I didn't even have time to discuss today, but that's about adding articles to your map. You can do all of this on free. So yeah, the core things is these very specific filters, which again, it's going to generally be because you have so many papers that you're going to want to use those. So these are paid, as well as certain map limits. So you can only upload a certain number of articles on the free version. And it's something like, I think, 100 articles per map. But go ahead and give those a test, and you can check our pricing page on our website for any other specific changes there. Someone is actually asking a very interesting question, Yasaman. What is better for lit review? Similar abstract and title content or the citation search? So that's actually a really great question. I think that's actually really open to the chat and to the other researchers here, because probably there is no right or wrong. It probably depends. And this is kind of the whole, one of the things that I find really great about Litmaps is, unlike, maybe some other tools or that are more prescribed, that are just giving you something, you have a lot more autonomy in deciding what you want to look, how you want to look for it. And in this respect, depending on where you are in the literature review process and what aspects you want to highlight, you can pick this algorithm, you can pick these filters. So, and to make it a bit more understandable, I also have, this is my algorithms guide, which I will also send out later. But even in this guide, I kind of mention, and in other places as well, what are these algorithms defined as? And this gives you an idea of what's most appropriate to use in your case. So for example, for the similar abstract and title content, I say it's especially useful if you want to find papers that might have fewer citations or from a journal or place you wouldn't normally check. So that can be really useful. I will definitely send this out. But again, this really is your, this is a big question. I don't know if there's really a right or wrong algorithm. It's just like, when is it appropriate? Great question about if some user often needs to find African authors, and is there a way to narrow down on specific authors? So the short answer is no. Right now, we don't have an author filter. This filter is all we have right now. But I would say the key thing about any comprehensive searching or any search where you already have something in mind, the key thing with Litmaps is just to curate the best collection you can. So this collection here in the middle, this is the key driver of the Litmaps algorithm. If you can make this middle as accurate as possible, as on point as possible, then your recommendations are going to be even more relevant. So if you curate this collection in the middle with many African authors or authors of whatever specific place you're interested in, and then you run this common authorship patterns, this is another algorithm we didn't have time for, but this is showing us what other, like which authors are working together the most and having the most common collaborations in our set, and what other papers have they written. So this can be very useful if you're interested in more author-targeted evaluation. A question about importing articles in other languages and converting to English. So in Litmaps, again, has no translation right now built in. If you want to translate something, you're going to have to do that offline. But even so, there's only the data we have available we can search on, I guess is the best way to say it. So unfortunately, we don't have this capability. However, we do have articles that aren't in English already. And yes, and that's perhaps I will wrap up the questions and do a quick data explanation for anyone who is here. I know we're slightly running out of time, but I'll do a quick data explanation so you have an understanding of where the papers come from, and you will see that some may not be in English. However, yeah, this is a limitation of perhaps many tools of wherever we get our data from. It's just a limitation sometimes. All right, so I'm going to switch over to save some time here and just present the final few slides about pricing and about our database, which are really common questions we get. Okay, so just a couple slides here just on pricing, just so you have an awareness of what that looks like, and then on data, and then we can wrap it up. So here, again, we have free, pro, and then many other plans. So we have team plans for research groups or say teachers and their students, research labs, and then we also have institutional plans. So if your entire university is interested in Litmaps, excellent, definitely get in touch with us and we'll happily talk about that. But otherwise, most people here are probably thinking about these two. You might be an individual using free, or you might be wanting to get a premium version. So this is the key differences that I mentioned, certain unlimited maps, articles, advanced searching, and so on. So if you are going to be very casually using, just looking for a few papers, you'll probably be fine on the free version. But if you're wanting to do anything super comprehensive, so like this comprehensive stuff I talked about, yeah, you will naturally see at which point you think it's useful for you to have Pro. And if you do decide to upgrade to Pro, the really important thing to know is our pricing is very much dependent on your country. So in order to have country parity pricing, so it's actually at a reasonable rate for people across the world, because we have a very global user base. We have like 130 plus countries of users. So like most countries, many countries. And for this reason, if you go to the app, so you've set up a free account and you click on the button at the bottom left, this is the best way to know what price it is. And yes, I can see in the comments that in some countries, because of sanctions, that this thing doesn't work, you know, that you cannot do purchases because of sanctions. In this case, at this time, I don't know, we cannot really offer anything else right now. So I would say if you are in a sanctioned country, then please definitely use the free version. And you can also contact us personally at support and see what can be done. But otherwise, there's not so much we can offer right now based on sanctions. I think it is kind of outside of our jurisdiction, unfortunately. But otherwise, most countries, you're going to be able to see right here, what is your cost. It's going to be in this numbers here. I put a red star because it's going to change based on where you are. And of course, it's we monitor this usage and we ensure it's where you're doing most of your research out of. So where you are actually doing your research. So if you're from one country, but you're living in another country, that's the country that is going to be your pricing. Keep that in mind, please. And you'll see this little yellow box with your promo code, and you can use that. And this is just to give you an idea that you won't see this in the app, but just to give you an idea that many countries have many different discounts. And yes, this is our best attempt to try to make it a good price for as many people as possible. And additionally, the kinds of plans, just a small note, monthly versus annual. So of course you get a little discount on annual, but you can do either. And if you're unsure, you can do monthly. And you also, the cancellation process works that if you cancel, it of course will be active until that final date. So you can always cancel it and then say, okay, I know it's going to end on the date that I've already paid until. So you can keep that in mind. Additionally, for this webinar, we're giving special discount, 30% off if it's your first purchase with Litmaps. So just keep this in mind. I'll send it in the email, July 25 web, and it'll expire in 1 week. So it's just a fun thing. So thank you for attending the webinar. And if you would like to sign up, please use that if you don't already have a bigger country discount that you can use. So you can only have one, your bigger discount or this one. So lastly, with data, this is super common question. I'm sorry to save it till the end, but yeah, this is a very big topic, so I kind of saved it. But to summarize, this is the Litmaps database in the light blue bar, and these are a lot of other places that we source data from, as well as some other tools on the market. So as you see, a lot of tools and a lot of web sourcing areas like OpenAlex, they have many hundreds of millions of papers. We are at, actually, I think now it's above 270 million. So every single week, we're adding hundreds of thousands of papers. So for this reason, very quickly, plots like this get out of date. It's always increasing. And we source data from 3 key source data providers. So that's Crossref, Semantic Scholar, and OpenAlex. When you're in the application and you're searching in that quick search bar, like I typed in the keywords and I click search, that by default is using the semantic search algorithm, but it's searching across everything we have. So that's a cool distinction to note, that we have many papers, even more perhaps than like we are combining these different sources, but we are, say, mainly relying on that Semantic Scholar database. And the final thing to note here is what kind of data is it? So it's open access metadata. And the key distinction here is OA metadata is not OA papers. So you might find papers that are paywalled, that are journals and publishers that you need to have access to because your university has access to them or because you have other means of having access. That's kind of out of our control. That's just the publishing and academic industry and how things are set up. But what we can do is we can at least tell you, hey, look, this paper does exist and it has this abstract and it seems relevant. And the best we can do is give you a link to that paper. And then based on your access through your library and your institution, you can see if you have access to it. So that's why we also can give so many recommendations and we can find so many relevant papers, is because we're using open access metadata. This is a much, much, much bigger catalog than if we just used OA papers. But of course, this is still limited. So if there's articles that are, say, certain military articles or things that are censored and are not available OA metadata, we can't give you access to those. We just won't have them cataloged either. Okay, and then another great thing to think about is coverage. So if you're thinking, hey, I study like historic art, or I study this very specific niche topic, or often this is something between the hard sciences versus liberal arts, based on my topic, do you have papers on my topic? The best thing, again, is to just use the tool. You are the best tester in the world. You know what your topic is and you can evaluate this. But the other thing we can say is, based on some analyses that others have done of databases, and particularly this paper evaluating Semantic Scholar and other huge data platforms, this is the distribution across fields. And so Semantic Scholar, which again is our main provider, is one of the, like, according to this study, which I can also share in the email, is one of the second best regarding the overall subject coverage. So here is like all these databases. Semantic Scholar is number 2. And here are all the different fields covered. So you can see that this orange one, medicine, is really big. Medicine is the biggest, but we still have many other topics here that are relatively well distributed. So it's not just medicine, it's not just biology, it's not just humanities, but there is some spread here. But again, as many good questions have been here about systematic review and so on, if you are doing a literature review and you're reading about the process, you'll also know that the best practice is always to use more than one database. And so this can be highly appropriate for you. But of course, we are wanting to say that you can always use more than one source, and in fact, it would be best, because they're all sourcing different ways, and this is how we get the best coverage and the best, most comprehensive search. Okay. And lastly, I like to mention this regarding citations and references. So I haven't seen this question yet today, but it's a very common question I do get. So if you're on the application and you see a paper and it says it has 10 citations, and then you go to Google Scholar and it says it has 500 citations, this is often, this is alarming to some users, like, what's going on? Why are there so many? So I made a whole dedicated video to this. And in short, it's not as bad as it seems. And it really boils down to how citations are calculated. as well as how our data is sourced. So it is both. It's not that we have 100% perfect coverage and we deny any allegations. Like, no, of course, we can have better coverage, but it's also not as extreme, because at the very least, in short, what I can say, especially with Google Scholar, is it's, for example, counting duplicates. So you might have several versions of the same paper. They're all getting counted there. Whereas for us, we have only unique entries. So if it has 10 citations, that's 10 unique papers. Whereas here, it might be having many different versions of the same paper that are also getting looped into the citation count. And that's why sometimes this number, it's not that it's exaggerated or wrong, they're just different calculations. And so they're going to look different. So I really want to emphasize that missing doesn't equal wrong. However, of course, if you're seeing something that you do think is wrong, it's incorrect, it's incorrectly sourced, let us know. We are always trying to increase the database and consider what users are paying attention to, like what's the important fields to focus on. And yeah, versioning is the key thing. I have an in-depth video here. I can link in our follow-up email of why these numbers are different and what that means. Okay, so this is the kind of wrap up of the webinar. We did the literature review, simple searching, advanced searching, a bit about Pro, a bit about our data, lots of great questions from you all. So I can take a few minutes here to answer any questions we didn't talk about. You're welcome to put in the chat or even ask out loud if you'd like. I can see the final few questions that came in. We did cover them already. So yeah, please let us know. And yeah, feel free to chime in with any final questions you might have. And thank you all so much for attending. It was such an honor to always share our tool with you, and a privilege to get your questions, because they really help us make the tool better and understand how you're using it, what are you interested in, and so on. Yeah, thank you all so much.